Sweet. Cool. Stop playing those. Cool. Welcome. Cool. Glad you guys are here. We're going to talk about some science today. Why is it doing that? Science today. S-C-I-E-N-C-E. Science. So, we're going to talk about science, but the first thing that I want to talk about, as I always do, I just talk about things that I like apparently. Oh no, what is going on? This is not good. We're being hacked by the enemy. Just kidding on it. Why is it doing that? Cool. I'm just gonna ignore that. Who even buys Tiger tablets? Come on, buy them. iPad, bro. I'm going to try to fix that super quick. Cool. So we're going to talk about science, and the first thing that I have to ask you is about fishing. So we've talked about this a lot. Did not get out of here. What if God was going on? Okay, cool. So raise your hand if you like fishing. We're going to be on track now. Sounds good? Wait, I know they do, but some of you guys are just lying. So we're going to talk about for a second. So if you know me, I love fishing. This is one of the big fish I caught this summer. It was really big. It's not Photoshopped. It was amazing. He felt great. Like, really heavy. It was amazing. So, like I said, if you know me, you know that I really enjoy fishing. And one of the coolest things, I love about fishing is I love studying the biology of it, right? I love understanding what's going on with the fish and why things are happening the way that they are, right? The science. Like, I love studying the time of day, how that affects the fish, the clarity of the water, the temperature of the water, the color of the bait you're using, how that affects how the fish feed, when they're hungry, what time, even like the moon phases can affect when the fish eat. It's crazy. And when I spend tons of time watching YouTube videos, reading articles, focus on this, I start to feel like a scientist, like legit. Like I feel like I'm trying to figure out how the world works. And as I was thinking about fishing, you're literally a scientist. Like it's kind of cool. So you know how science works. It's like you make a hypothesis, right? So I'm tying on my new crankbait. My hypothesis is that this will catch fish. Then I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to throw that boy out there, bring it back. I'm probably not going to catch any fish. So I'm going to conclude this did not catch fish. But I'm doing science and I'm experimenting. And it's really interesting. And for example, the story of how I caught that really big fish, that's not Photoshop, it's huge. But the story of that is we were fishing throughout the day, me and two of my brothers, and we were fishing very shallow. We were casting right towards the shore, and we were catching a couple fish. And all the fish that we were catching were very small fish. So me and my brother were like, how can we get you the big boys? We need to catch some big fish. So one of the things we thought about is we thought about some of the facts that we know about fish. We thought about how it was getting later in the summer, how the water was getting a little cooler, how a lot of these fish were feeding for the winter to get big and fat. So we thought about all the small fish seem to be feeding really shallow, pressed up. So that brought us to conclude that maybe the bigger fish are deeper in the water, kind of roaming around back away from the shore. So we took the boat, and as you can see, the shore is way back there. So we went way out here, and we started casting, and almost right away, we caught 3 that were almost that size. And then I was throwing a crankbait that went really deep down, because we thought this fish must be deep, and then boom, caught that boy, got it up, got some cool pictures. Really fun experience. It was amazing. But we concluded that the big fish had already gone deep, right? They had gone deep while the smaller fish were still kind of feeding for the winter in the shallow area. And we concluded that by a lot of little scientific things, right? By the time of the year, that it was late summer, by the evidence that we were seeing, by that it was getting colder, right? And the water temperature was going down. So like I said, this is part of what it means to be a scientist, right? You guys have all learned the scientific method. How that works is you make a hypothesis, you say, I want to find out how this works, you do some experiments, and then you make a conclusion about that. And that's what I was doing. So our big question today is, has science disproved Christianity? And like I said, science is our topic, and one big myth about Christianity is this idea that science is something that has proved that Christianity is not true. And the bad thing about that is it assumes that Christianity and science are two things that have to be directly opposed to each other. Two things that cannot be together. And my talk today is not to go through every fact of why science is wrong. That's not what we're doing. But what we're talking about is these two categories, Christianity and science, and how these two things do not have to be separated, but they can actually come together in a really beautiful way. So as we start, we're going to watch a really cool video that just helps us make sense about these two categories, science and Christianity. And it shows some cool drawings and illustrations. So we're going to watch the first 2 minutes, because after the 2 minutes, they say really big words, and I was very confused. So the first two are very helpful, then we're going to come back together and talk about it. So let's go. I think I have to run in terms of volume. That's okay. Science. Bible or science book?
So here's a question. If you find yourself fascinated by nature, say the nesting habits of woodpeckers, should you worry that studying them will lead you away from your faith? Or if you're energized by your time staring into the fascinating world only seen through a microscope, will it lead you to believe that you have no soul? Or if you regularly ponder the wonders of the stars up above, will a career or hobby in astronomy make you question the existence of God? While these questions may seem absurd, the rocky relationship between science and some streams of Christianity has led some to conclude that believers should not be involved in the study of what they encounter in the outdoors, under a microscope, or twinkling in the galaxy. Is that the case? And if not, why do we believe that what we learn from doing science will conflict with the meaning we derive from our faith? It turns out the conflict is not so much between science and faith, as it is between opposing worldviews. If you're not familiar, a worldview is a philosophical understanding of how you believe the world to be. Your worldview influences how you answer big questions like, who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? And how did this world come to be? Your worldview defines how you see the world and your place in it. But what does this have to do with science? As you probably know, we use science to answer questions about the natural world through observation and experiment. You may not know that it's a verb, it's something you do, it's not a collection of facts. Science is a valuable process that can answer questions that theology does not fully address. Christians should not fear science. It produces a better understanding of God's creation, and thus, it should produce a better understanding of God. The tension comes from some underlying assumptions about how science should be performed. A widely held modern approach to science called methodological naturalism limits scientific explanations to only natural causes.
Methodological
naturalism. Any reference to.
Cool. So that's where I was stopping it. Sorry, that was very tough. But those first 2 minutes I feel like are really helpful for us. And two of the main things that it talks about there is it talks about how science helps us to understand creation, right? Science doesn't have to be this thing that we only go to in order to try to disprove things or disprove God, but it actually helps us to understand how God created things the way that He did, and the incredible creativity of God. And I think that second big thing that it talks about, which I think is kind of one of our main points for the night, is that science isn't like this stance. Right? It's not like I am either a Christian or I am a science. Like, that doesn't make sense. But it's not like you have to go over here science or you have to go over here Christian. You don't have to go over there because it's not a political party of science. It's not like a stance that you have. But it said that science is a verb, right? It's something that you do. It's a method of understanding and experimentation. So these things are things that for some reason we have separated them so much, but science actually can help us understand the world that God created. So are science and Christianity, are they two things that have to be opposed to each other? Do you have to choose science or Christian? No, you do not have to. Obviously, there are scientists who say, God's not real, Big Bang, let's go. There's people like that. So you're not choosing the side of science, you're choosing to side with the beliefs of that person. But science itself is not a stance, it is a way of doing things, a way of understanding the world through methods, scientific method, and all of that. So I was doing a lot of research, going back in time, looking at different things. And one of the interesting things that I found was that science was actually kind of created because of God. So a long time ago, science so kind of how science is known right now is we're doing this to disprove God. Or that's how a lot of us think, even though that's not actually how it is. But back then, it was something that was used to understand how God had created things, like I was saying. Like back then, instead of seeing something and being like, this shows God's not real, they would see something happen, and because belief in God was such a normal, general thing, when they would see something happen, they would say, why is this happening? And then the next question they would ask was, why did God create it this way? And then they would use science to actually help them to understand who God was and why he did what he did. So it was almost like a theology of like studying God. Because they all kind of believed in God back then, or some sort of God, so they would do this science in order to understand why that God created things the way that he did. And another interesting thing I thought about was the idea of there only being one God, right? That's what I believe. Most of us believe there's only one God. But a long time ago, when a lot of people believed that there were tons of gods, right? So raise your hand if you know like Greek mythology, right? You ever heard of that? A lot of us have, especially those public school, because they talk about it all the time for some reason. I remember we did Greek mythology, like 7 times. It doesn't make sense. But back then, they kind of believed that tons of different gods did things in the world that created different outcomes, right? Like one God was in charge of this, or one God, this is why the sun was this way. And a lot of these, now we look at them as like symbolic stories, but back then a lot of that was believed and worshipped. And especially other religions, they worship multiple gods, not just Greek mythology. So one of the reasons they created science was to show that there is only one God. And I'm telling you this stuff because if we think science is always opposed to God, why was the pursuit of God kind of the creation of science? So, as we start this part, I just want to read on page 99, the book we've been going through. She kind of talks about what I'm saying here, with the idea of there were people that believed in a lot of gods, but science kind of helped them to believe in one God. It kind of almost proves the existence that there's one God and one law. I would say bless you, but Jesus already did that when he gave his life for you. It's amazing, y'all. Cool. So I'm going to read just 2 paragraphs here on page 99, talking about many gods and then science showing one. So let's read this. So she's talking about scientific method and stuff. So today we are so used to the scientific process that we don't question it. But the first scientists believed that there were consistent laws running the universe because they believed that there was a consistent law-giving God. They learned from the Bible that there was only one God who created the universe in an orderly way, and that he was the kind of God who did not change his mind. So they guessed that he had made the universe according to laws that would work the same all over the world and that would not change over time. So if there were a lot of gods, you might expect to find different rules in different places, like how different countries have different laws. And you might expect the rules to change depending on which God was in charge in that place or in that time. But if there was only one God over the whole world who has always been in charge and will always be in charge, you could expect the laws to be the same in every place and in every time. And the first scientists knew from the Bible that God is free, that no one tells him what to do. So the only way to figure out what laws God has put in place was to go and look at them. And that's how science was started. So I'm going to read the book now. It's gone. But it's interesting, right? Because you look at that, and obviously back, the people that they're talking about, that was a very primitive understanding, right? They were the first people who were asking, why are things happening? And the decision that they made was because things happen the same no matter where you are, kind of with these laws of science, they concluded that this idea that there were so many different gods cannot be true, because it would be like in his realm, and all this different stuff happening, but it seemed to be consistent over the whole world that pushed them to start to believe in monotheism, which is the belief in one God. So that's the big one God thing. The next part I want to talk, and this is where like most of you want to talk about, is creation, right? This idea that God created the world out of nothingness. So when you think about science versus Christianity, this is probably one of the main things you think about, because you think about how your schools say, God didn't create the world, we evolved, or there was a big bang, and it went bang, and big stuff happened. Crazy. I have a really funny graphic with the big bang that I made, you'll see it in a minute. But we're going to take just a couple minutes and read a couple verses from Genesis 1, so right at the beginning of the Bible, and then just talk about what happened. And we're going to talk about how I believe that, a lot of us believe that, but these are things that have been misinterpreted, right? Or some people don't believe them. So, I'm going to drink water. You like that space background, That's space. Science. Cool. So these are three major creating things that God did. Right? So right away, first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. A lot of us have read this a lot because we say, I'm going to read the whole Bible, and I'm going to read the verses. I've done that way fast. But we know this part. So, created the world. Second part, creates animals, right? God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Genesis 1:25. And then 2 verses later, 1:27, God creates people. God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So we see these big claims, right? The Bible tells us that God created the world. And then we see that God created animals and then people. And if you read Genesis, he creates everything that's here right now. And it's amazing. And it's cool because he doesn't just create it, but he says, this is good, right? He blesses it and he is happy with what he has created, which is awesome. So these are the big claims of creation. And I don't want to talk about this with the middle schoolers because it's confusing, but an interesting thing about creation, and this is for maybe one of you or some of you who are kind of confused about this, who might feel like maybe they interpret the Bible a little bit differently. So when I went to Bible college, I had a friend and I learned that there are a lot of Christians who believe in Jesus. They believe Jesus died and rose again for us and that God created the world. But they have very different beliefs when it comes to creation. It's really interesting. And there were actually Bible college professors at my school who believed in these different beliefs. And at first I was like, nah, they're not Christians. But they are. They just have interpreted it differently. And obviously we want to be careful saying that, because it's got to be with what the Word of God is saying. You can't just believe whatever you want. But for example, you know how the Bible says that the universe or the world was created in 6 days, and then God rested. So 6 days. There's a lot of Christians that think it's like the old earth, new earth theory. This is why I tell the middle school. It's confusing. But they believe that those days, like one day, so it says on the first day God created heavens and earth, or whatever. And so they would believe that one day is like a couple thousand years, right? Because they would say God is timeless. He does not work only in 24-hour days. They would say Genesis is used to tell us that God created the world, but also is more symbolic than literal. And they would say, so these 6 days were actually thousands and thousands of years of things moving and evolving and all things going on. But they still believe that God kicked off that process and that he created everything. Me personally, I believe in the literal 6 days. That there are 24 hours because I just read the Bible as it's given to me. But I just say that because I think some of us Christians, we want to believe in Jesus, we want to give our lives to him, but we get so caught up in a couple of these things. And there are a lot of Christians that interpret some of the creation stuff in Genesis a little differently, and they still love Jesus. They still are going to heaven. They just have viewed it differently. And it's not just their opinion. There's a lot of research about these different things. And I know it's kind of weird bringing that up, but I just felt like it'd be important just to point out that there's not, in terms of being a Christian, there's not always a perfect understanding of everything. We can disagree on a couple things, like the end of the world. People have so many different opinions on how the end of the world is going on. So many different Christians. But we all believe in Jesus, and that is the essential thing that unites us. That was really my notes, but I think this is an important thing to throw out there. So let's Big Bang. Okay, let's talk about this. So when we're talking about creation, there's kind of two big counter arguments from scientists, right? Or science, not scientists. Well, yeah. The Big Bang and then evolution, right? So the Big Bang is very interesting. I've thought about this a lot the past couple of days. But so I have the middle schoolers yell bang at the count of 3. Do we want to do this, or is that more on the middle school? Okay, so at the count of 3, we're going to be really quiet. There's going to be nothingness, and they're all going to yell bang, and we're going to create a universe together. It's going to be cool. Probably be a lot of pizza there. Okay, 1, 2, 3. That was so bad. That's funny. No universes were created at all. But universe denied. Wow. Okay, so the Big Bang is kind of this theory and this idea that the universe was created in one massive event that essentially caused the universe based on a reaction or something. There's a lot of different theories within the Big Bang theory that caused the universe to be created. So I created a really funny graphic about the Big Bang. So we're in space in the Big Bang. Thank you. None of the middle schoolers laughed. I appreciate it. Bang energy in space, Big Bang, galaxy. It's the biggest Earth. So I make those jokes, but I feel like it just derailed I'm sorry. So as I thought about the Big Bang and I thought about creation, I started to be very confused because honestly, they kind of seem like the same thing. Because they believe that there was one event that caused the universe to create itself. I believe in the same thing. I believe that God created the universe out of nothing. They believe that there was one point in history where there was nothing and then there was everything. That's what I believe about God as well. It just felt like the Big Bang theory was very similar, Joe. The theory was similar to what I believe about God. And I thought it was interesting because it felt almost like this argument against Christianity was almost like for Christianity. So then I went deep into it. I was reading the book and I did some of my own research. And it's really interesting as you look at kind of the origins of the Big Bang theory. It's very interesting because the guy who proposed the Big Bang theory, Georges Lemaitre, he was actually Catholic, right? So he believed in God. And he proposed this idea of the Big Bang, and it was actually rejected at first because they were like, that sounds too much like Christianity. And he's like, nah, dude. But they were like, because the belief back then was not that the world was created, it was that the universe always was and always will be, right? It had no start or stop. It was always there. That was the scientific conclusion. But Christianity, one of the big parts of that is that there is a start to the universe. There's not a start to God, but there's a start to the universe in the fact that God created it. So this dude was actually totally got in trouble, right? They didn't like him. Because going by that belief that the universe had a beginning, people thought that sounded too much like God creating the universe. And it's very interesting to see how people have taken that belief and now made it one of the main stands against Christianity. And I know there's a lot more science involved in the Big Bang that I don't understand, but when I think about it as just a normal man, it seems a little bit like God creating the world, but I know there's a lot more going on. But that's one of the big things that people are going to say as an attack against Christianity. Ooh, it's like time to go. Okay. Cool. Let's keep going. I'll go quick. Evolution, right? So there's kind of two kinds of evolution, right? You have this full evolution, which we came from cells, turned into slimy guys, and then turned into monkeys or something like that, right? They'll be totally evolved from basically just cells. And then there's also this idea of adaptive evolution, which is something I believe in, which is basically that things evolve over time based on circumstances and environments. So for example, dogs, right? There was a wolf, and then there's so many different dogs. And I know a lot of that was humans breeding them and stuff like that, but different dogs that were in different places, like you look at the husky, who was in really cool temperatures over hundreds of years. Their fur changed and it got thicker and they were able to withstand more temperatures. You got that Chihuahua down in Mexico. They lost all their hair. Stuff like that. It's a type of evolution that over time, creation adapts to the environment that it's in. And that's the type of evolution that I believe in. The evolution I don't believe in is the idea that we came from apes and that we were not, because that says we were not made in the image of God. Right? And like I said, there actually are Christians who believe in all of that, which I that bothers me a little bit, but that God kicked that off, that it was still part of his plan. I don't agree with that, but like I said, a lot of Christians have different opinions. But nowadays, this idea of evolution is one of the leading beliefs of atheism. Right? And it is really interesting. So it's kind of the Big Bang and then evolution as these two things. And like I said, science is not opposed, but some of these views are opposed to Christianity. So I'm not really going to stick on this. I did for middle school. But it was just interesting because if you think about Christianity as something that is opposed to science, if you look back in time, you see that so many prominent scientists that made discoveries that changed how we view the earth were Christians and believe in Jesus. And Albert Einstein had like his 3 heroes that he talked about. All of them were Christians. So if you say like Christians and science don't mix, dude, if you didn't have Christian scientists, like we wouldn't understand a lot of you would jump off buildings and not know what's going on. Because Isaac Newton was a Christian. That's the guy, sat on an apple tree, apple fell, gravity. He is the guy who invented gravity. I guess he didn't invent it, but he understood it. Yeah. He was the first person that went down. No. But it's just interesting going through all of these names of Christians. Like the second guy, Michael, electromagnetism. He had many things named after him. The Faraday effect. If you got something named after you, you're legit. I have nothing named after me. James Clerk Maxwell. He had huge advances in electricity, magnetism, light. This Mendel guy. You ever heard of like the Mendel effect? That's a big thing. It was he started the study of genetics, which is insane. And that's something where people would say that could be against Christ, but that helps us understand why God created us the way he did. Lord Kelvin, there's a unit of temperature measurement called kelvins. He was a Christian. All these people as well. Russell Calburn, he does not burn cows, but this guy, he's the world expert in nanotechnology. In Avengers Infinity War, when Iron Man was standing there, and then the suit came onto him. Nanotechnology. Russell Calburn, he's a Christian. It's incredible. So as we finish, because we ran out of time, because I was talking about Christian perspectives for a long time, all that to say, last super quick argument, okay? So a lot of atheists, they kind of view Christianity. So I was reading a thing about Stephen Hawking. Yeah, and he was like, we are machines and we will die as machines. And it was just really sad and really depressing. And I just think if you look at the world like that without God, if you view science through such a thick lens of this is all there is, it's hard for you to think about things like love and sacrifice and passion if everything you view is just as we are machines and we will die machines, right? It's crazy. And the example I use is when I look at my son Charlie, I don't view him as a machine, right? I view him as my beautiful son, who I would die for, who's so fun, who whines a lot lately, but that's okay. But I don't view him as a machine. And I think about how Christians, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, are so in the pro-life, right? We fight against abortion because we don't view babies as just machines. We view them as people that were born in the image of God. So we could go more and more on that, but we're not going to. So all that to say, as we finish, science is not directly opposed to Christianity, right? Because science is a verb. It's something you do. It's not a group or a stance. And as Christians, we can use science as a way to understand God and his laws, and we can use it to advocate for Christianity and for creation. Next up, creation is extremely important, right? It's one of our key things to understanding God and for fighting for our faith. But we've also looked at how there are some Christians that have a little different agreements about how Genesis worked out, but we still believe in the same God and the same Jesus. And then lastly, Christian scientists, Mr. Calburn, nanotech, we're changing the world today, and they have been throughout history. So as we end, I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between standing with God or standing with science. That's not how it works. You don't have to make this grand decision. And if you decide, like I said, if you decide the scientists are going to stand with him instead of God, that's a little bit different. But science and God are not two things that have to be separated. So I hope that you understand more about science, our relationship with it as Christians, how it came to be, and how it actually shows the existence of God. So we're going to close with prayer, and then in small group, you feel free to go deeper into some of these little intricacies that I was not able to touch on. So we're going to pray. Cool. Dear God, thank you for the way that you created the world. God, thank you that you didn't make all largemouth bass the same size. God, you are so creative in the things that you have done. God, thank you that we can use science as a tool to understand who you are and the incredible way that you have created this world. God, thank you for Christian scientists that have studied genetics and DNA to understand why you did the same things you did and how amazing it is. God, thank you that science and Christianity do not have to be disconnected, that you can believe in science while believing in God at the same time. Thank you that it helps us to understand you. I know this is a big topic, Lord, for those of us in specifically public school. God, I pray for those of us in public school who feel like they are constantly hearing how their faith is false and not real. God, would you give them faith